Hello. I was at a storytelling event a couple of months ago, hosted by Eric Miller in India, the Chennai Storytelling Festival World Storytelling Institute, and I was doing one of his Monday events. And there was another storyteller on the lineup called Bruce Marcus, a storyteller poet, so a rhyming storyteller who creates his own storied rhymes. And he lives around Boston area, Massachusetts, and he invited me along or suggested I put myself forward, I can't quite remember which, to be a guest storyteller at the Story Space, where he's one of the hosts and one of the regulars. So that's what happened. A couple of weeks ago, I went along just to see how it would go. It was kind of midnight in my time when it started here in the UK, about 7 o'clock there in Eastern time. And I really enjoyed it. There was an open space where storytellers shared stories, and then the guest that night was my friend Jim Brule from New York, and they were very interested, it seemed to me, in personal stories, but also stories where there was a lot of layers to the story, lots to talk about and think about. So when I guested last week as the featured storyteller, I chose stories that I'd learned from people I've met, but stories that also made us think more deeply about how we can make the world a better place. So here's the recording. I hope you enjoy it. It's the audio recording of the live event of me sharing four of my very favourite tales.
David Heathfield is he teaches. He's a teaching storyteller. He teaches kids all over the world. He's called an international storyteller, and he writes material for teachers, teaching them how to teach kids using storytelling. He runs courses and workshops for teachers and storytellers from all over, just all sorts of any culture. He's not he's just not intimidated by any of that, except he dies of stage fright every time, But anyway, so he has until about 5 minutes of 2. Is that in your time?
5 to 2.
5 to 2. So David, take us where you will.
Oh, thank you very much, Ralph, and thank you.
Hey, David!
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I feel that I'm among friends already after that hour of story sharing and listening to a lovely array of stories. Bruce, thanks for pointing me in this direction, encouraging me to be a featured teller. It's a bit late here. It is 1 o'clock in the morning, but I've got that buzz ready because, like you talked about going on stage, I know that feeling very well. And when I was younger, I needed to be pushed on as well. And now I can't wait to run out. So here I am. I'm in Exeter, Devon, southwest of England, in the historic city of Exeter. And, well, here we are, together, side by side. Let's just have a reprise. Oh, we ain't got a barrel of money. Maybe we're ragged or funny, but we'll travel along, singing this song, side by side. Yeah, I love sharing stories from around the world, and I love meeting people from around the world. You're right, Ralph. I run lots of courses for teachers who teach kids and teenagers and even teach adults as well about applying storytelling in teaching, and particularly language teaching. Most of the people who do my courses are involved in some way in teaching languages, often English as a second or a foreign language. Right at the moment, I'm running one of my courses. There are teachers on my course from Angola, Tanzania, Argentina, Mexico, Singapore,
Palestine, Turkey, Germany. I mean, really, it's truly global. I'm really fortunate to do what I do. And as I'm teaching people about storytelling, or teaching or facilitating their learning, because, we're all storytellers, aren't we? I'm learning a lot of stories along the way as we travel along. Year before last, during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, I did a project called Around the World in 88 Tales. And a couple of people in the room here were participants, were co-storytellers in that project. I met 44 storytellers in 44 different parts of the world. And I showed them objects from the museum here in Exeter, the Royal Albert Memorial Museum. And I told them a story about that object. And then they would tell me a story back, a story inspired by the object or inspired by my story. And it was a sharing around the world. Jean Hale, who I think lots of you know is here, and Jean Hale represented the whole of the USA. That's quite a thing. And Mindy Neo, who's also in the room, represented Singapore. Local connection. I don't know if you know a wonderful storyteller who lives near many of you, a storyteller who teaches as a professor of English, the English department at Eastern Connecticut State University. Do you know a storyteller called Raouf Mama? Maybe you do. Yes, you do. Okay. Well, Raouf Mama, he was on as part of the project as well. And although, of course, he's in the States like Jean, he was representing Benin, his home country. And he told the most beautiful story. And part of the project was me learning stories and retelling stories with permission. And Raouf Mama encouraged me to retell the story from here. A story that Raouf learnt from, well, he said he learned it from his elder mother. In other words, his aunt, his mother's older sister, because he said she was the head of the family. She was the one who brought him up. And before he told the story, he evoked her through, or invoked her presence through a song, which I won't attempt to sing. But funnily enough, when Jean Hale told her story, it was a variant of the same story. I'm guessing lots of you know this story. So if you know this story, please be quiet. Don't give away the ending. But if you haven't heard this story before, I might invite you to make a guess about what the end of the story is. Let's begin. I'll say story, story. You can say, tell us a story, and I know you're with me. Even if you're muted, I can see your lips moving. Story, story.
Tell us a story.
Can you hear that? Well, there was a hunter. And this hunter didn't have much money. This hunter was poor. This hunter lived with his wife, his father, and his mother. His father and mother were elderly now. They couldn't go out hunting. They could barely look after themselves. His mother had lost her sight. So it was he and his wife who took responsibility for caring for the elders. But it was hard. It was a time of famine. And the hunter caught almost nothing on the arid land where nothing was growing. No creatures came to graze. And they became hungrier and hungrier, and he was desperate to feed his family. So he took his bow and his arrow one day, and he went where it was forbidden. He went into the enchanted forest. He stepped between the green trees, for here there was some growth, there was some moisture. And there, as he came between the trees, he saw, bounding towards him, a small antelope. "Hunter! Hunter! Do not shoot me!" Well, the hunter's arrow was drawn in the bow. He was about to strike. But the antelope said, "If you kill me, you and your family and your future generations will be cursed. first. What will you give me if I do not kill you? Hunter, said the antelope, I will reward you with one wish. Wish for one thing, not more than one. Well, the hunter hesitated. Should he shoot the antelope or should he let the small creature live? I will make my wish, but I have no idea what to wish for. Give me time before I make my wish. Clever hunter! I will wait here, and tomorrow at this same hour I will be waiting here, waiting, and then you can make your one wish. The hunter walked away. Was he right to make this choice? He walked across the arid land, away from the enchanted forest. There was nothing growing. He returned with nothing to feed his elderly father and mother, his beloved wife. His father waited outside the small house. My son, have you brought nothing? Father, no, but... And he told the story of the antelope and the one wish. My son, said his father, you know what you must wish for. We are poor. We have nothing. Wish to be rich. You can say it too, everybody. Wish to be rich. Well, he thought about this. It seemed a fine wish. But when he went inside the house, there was his wonderful wife waiting for him. She embraced him and said, Husband, have you brought nothing? And he told his wife about the magic antelope and the wish. Oh, husband, you know for so many years we have wished for a child. Wish for a child, husband. Wish for a child. Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful to be a father? He thought about this all day long. He sat beside his elderly mother. There was a small fire. It was growing cold as the evening wore on. Oh, my son, we are so hungry. And he told his mother about the antelope and the wish. Oh, my child, for so many years I have seen nothing. Wish for your dear old mother to see again. Wish for your mother to see again. Oh, and how he wished that that would be his wish. But what should he wish for? He had three choices. To wish to be rich, or for a child, or for his dear mother to see again. And the hunter had no idea. He went to sleep that night, but he tossed and turned. He slept fitfully. He had many dreams. He often woke. And in the morning, still uncertain, he took his bow and arrow and set off once more across the dry and arid land and walked between the lush trees of the enchanted forest. And there, waiting, was the antelope. In that very same spot. Hunter, you have returned. Are you ready to make your one wish? And at that moment, the hunter knew. Suddenly, he knew what he would wish for. Oh, I know some of you know the answer. But those who haven't heard this story before, what wish would this hunter make? Somebody in this room has the power to unmute you if you would like to raise your hands and make your guess. Oh, I think Nancy has got her hand up. Is that right, Nancy? What do you think, Nancy?
I think that I hope that, and I haven't heard this story before, I hope that he wished that his mother could see. That's what
Wouldn't that be the most beautiful gift? Let's give a wave if you like Nancy's wish for his mother to see again. Oh, Ralph's got his hand up.
2 more wishes.
Oh, that's what everyone says. All the kids say that. Don't we all want more wishes? But how can he achieve this with just one wish? Mike?
He wished that his mother could see a happy and well-fed grandchild.
Now here we have creative thinking. Do we like Mike's idea?
Yeah, I like it.
Wonderful. We like all of your ideas. Well, you know what he wished for. I wish that my dear mother could gaze upon her grandchild and rock her grandchild in a cradle made of gold. "Hunter!" said the antelope. "Wise hunter, your wish will be given." And he left the green forest, the enchanted forest. And because he did not slay that antelope, as he walked across the land, thick clouds gathered and the rain began to fall. And before long the land had turned green, and not many months later, there he sat beside his beautiful mother with her bright shining eyes as she gazed on her dear grandchild and held the cradle made of gold with one hand and sang as the baby was rocked. And wealth came to that family, but not just to that family, to the whole community and all of the communities of that land, because the forest was left untouched, treasured in all its living beauty. So I thank you, Raouf Mama, there in Massachusetts, for giving me that story so I could pass it back to you. I love learning stories from people, but sometimes I learn stories from books as well. The story that I'm going to tell now is a story I learned from another person who was involved in that project, a very good friend called Amna Burki. Amna Burki is a storyteller, and she lives in Winnipeg in Canada, but she hails from Pakistan. Her origins are in northern India, but her family had to leave northern India during the partition. She grew up in Pakistan, she studied in London, she travelled to Winnipeg, and there she lives, and she works with diverse communities and is an emerging storyteller of great talent. And Amna's told me over the last couple of years that I've known her a number of stories that she grew up with, stories that were shared in her family and her community. And one of them, some of you will know this story, is about Abu Kasim. Abu Kasim and his shoes. And her mother would often talk about Abu Kasim's shoes as a kind of warning, a reminder for her children to be generous. So here's a story I learnt from Amna Burki. Do you remember the call and response? I say story, story. You say tell us a story. And then I know you're with me. Story, story? It's a story. Thank you. There was once, and there was not, a man called Abu Kasim, a trader, a merchant of great success. He was rich, but he was mean-spirited. He did not do his duty to spend the money he earned to share his wealth with those who lived around him in that great city of Baghdad. No, Abu Kasim hoarded his gold. He wouldn't even buy himself a new pair of shoes. His shoes were so worn, had been mended so many times, with so many stitches, they had grown and grown and grown. But it was not just the sight of his shoes that was famous. People knew Abu Kasim was coming close even before he arrived, because of the smell, the stink from round the corner of his old, worn, smelly shoes. But he was very sharp when it came to business. Abu Kasim heard that there was perfume for sale. A trader from Aleppo had arrived in Baghdad with a huge quantity of the finest quality rosewater, and it was being sold for a good price. Abu Kasim haggled and got an excellent deal. This perfume I will sell at the time of giving, at the time of the festival. I will make such a profit. And Abu Kasim kept that perfume, and not long after, another merchant arrived in Baghdad who was selling small glass bottles, finely cut. These are the perfect bottles for my perfume. And again he knocked the price down until he had bought a number of these fine, exquisite glass bottles. And you can imagine that evening Abu Kasim did not lose a drop of that perfume as he filled each one of those perfume bottles. And he set them on a shelf carefully and looked forward to the time when he would make a great profit. He was quite pleased with himself. He decided to do what he rarely did, to go to the bathhouse, the hammam, and treat himself to a massage, a trim, a rub down, a wash. So, as he arrived at the bathhouse, the hammam owner came out and said, "Oh, Abu Kasim, those shoes of yours," because Abu Kasim had taken them off by now. "Oh, Abu Kasim, really, it is time. You had new shoes." "Well, if someone would buy me some," Abu Kasim said, as he went into the hammam and proceeded to enjoy a luxurious bath. Not long after he arrived, there came the Cadi of Baghdad, the judge. And the judge arrived at the bathhouse and took off his splendid new leather shoes and set them at the entrance and entered. Well, you know as well as I do who was first to finish their bath. It was Abu Kasim, and when he came out, the two shoes that he saw in front of him were new leather shoes. "Oh, the hammam owner is a fine and generous fellow. He has bought me new shoes." And he put them on. They fitted perfectly, and Abu Kasim set off on his way home. But what was this? What did the Cadi find when he left the bathhouse? "Where are my shoes? All I see here are these stinking old plates of shoes that have been stitched so many times. I know these shoes. Everybody knows these shoes. These are Abu Kasim's shoes. Abu Kasim must have stolen my shoes." And the judge sent his guard to Abu Kasim's house. Well, the guard arrived, hammered on the door. Abu Kasim answered quite innocently, but he was seized by the guard, and sure enough, Abu Kasim was wearing the judge's shoes. "You stole my shoes," said the judge. "You have to pay for this. Give me my shoes back." And Abu Kasim tried to explain. "The punishment is such. You will pay 1 dinar as a fine and spend a night in the cells." Abu Kasim was desperate to plead his case, but he was not heard. He was thrown into the prison. But it didn't bother him to spend that night in prison. Much more concerning was the spending of a dinar. Well, when he left the cell, he was given his shoes back. But now he was angry. And this is what he said. "Oh, my shoes, you are the ones to blame." Will you say that as well? "Oh, my shoes, you are the ones to blame." And he took those shoes, and instead of wearing them home, he came to the river Tigris, that beautiful crystal river that was running through the middle of Baghdad. And he threw the shoes into the deepest part of the river and went home barefoot. It was already late. Well, that night, the fisherman came to the river, as he always did, and he cast his net in that deepest part of the river to see what he would catch. And, well, before long there were 2 weighty-seeming fish in his net, although they weren't wriggling much. And when he hauled them in, they weren't fish at all. You know what they were? They were Abu Kasim's shoes. Oh, what a state they're in! But these are Abu Kasim's shoes. How has he lost his shoes in the river? I must return them to Abu Kasim. And he took the shoes, went to Abu Kasim's house, but he saw that it was dark after all, and everyone was asleep, and the door was closed. So he went round the other side of the house, and there was an open window. Well, the fisherman kindly threw one of those shoes, and it sailed through the window, across the room, and struck, that very shelf where those perfume bottles were balanced. But fortunately, they trembled, they shook, but they didn't fall. Abu Kasim came running in. Oh, my perfume bottles are safe. But what he didn't see, that behind him the other shoe travelled across the room, over his head, and crash! One bottle after another fell to the ground. Abu Kasim, in his confusion, reaching for them all, caught none of them. Each bottle broke on the floor of his house, and he watched in despair as that profit seeped away. I will make nothing. I have lost all my goods. Oh, what will become of me? He blamed the shoes. You know what he said? You shoes, yes, everybody, you shoes, you are the ones to blame. He picked up those wet shoes. What shall I do with you? I will bury you so I will never have to see you again. And he took a shovel and he started digging in the corner of his own house. Well, it was night. He dug and was saying the most foul words about these shoes which cannot be repeated. And as he dug, his neighbours woke up. What's the noise from next door? Our wall is shaking. Our house will fall down. And they sent a message to the judge. Well, the judge didn't like to be woken up in the middle of the night. Who does? Well, it's the middle of the night here, but I don't mind because I'm with you. Well, there he was with those... the guard of the judge was sent to Abu Kasim's house, knocked on the door, and when the door was opened, he said, Abu Kasim, you are charged with trying to bring down your neighbour's house. Abu Kasim was brought before the judge. Abu Kasim, for doing this, you will be fined 10 dinar and spend 3 nights in prison. Oh, no! But Abu Kasim wasn't heard. He couldn't make his case, and he spent 3 nights languishing in that small cell. But more upsetting was the 10 dinar after losing all that money from that perfume, and now, to add insult to injury, I have to pay 10 dinar. After the 3 nights, Abu Kasim was reunited with those shoes. And you know what he said? You shoes, you are the ones to blame. And he took those shoes out into the street. And there was a gutter. And he tossed the shoes into the gutter and went back home. Now you know that Baghdad enjoys a mild climate, sometimes hot and usually dry. But occasionally there comes a rainstorm. And that night the clouds gathered and the rain fell. And the rain fell heavily. The waters ran down the streets into the gutters, and those shoes were washed into the main drain of the city of Baghdad. They blocked the drain and the waters rose. The water spilled out of the gutters and into the street. The water rose, an inundation. Many of the houses in that quarter of Baghdad were flooded. Well, when the news reached the judge, he wondered what the cause was. He sent his men, and they dived the next day into the water of the main drain to see what the blockage was. And you know what they discovered? 2 wet, stinking shoes. And when the judge saw Abu Kasim's shoes, send for Abu Kasim. And Abu Kasim was brought. You caused half of the houses in this quarter of Baghdad to be flooded, Abu Kasim. It is your fault. You are guilty. You will spend a month in prison and a fine of, let's say, how much? You know how much. 100 dinar. 100 dinar. Oh, that would be all my savings. And Abu Kasim tried to explain. Oh, a whole month he stayed in that tiny cell, fretting. Oh, and when he came out and was reunited with those shoes, he said, "You shoes, you are the ones to blame." And he was so upset. What would you do by this stage with these shoes that you just can't get rid of? Well, some of you may have guessed. He would burn them. If they are burnt and turned to ash, then they can do me no more harm. But they are sopping wet still. So he took them onto the flat roof of his house and he left them in the sun because, of course, the warm weather had returned. And the sun beat down and began to dry out his shoes as Abu Kasim went downstairs and tried to make a new start in his life. But you know, up on the roof of that house, a local stray dog was playing and found those 2 shoes and took them between his teeth, carried them jumping from roof to roof until he came to a large shady courtyard. And, well, just for fun, the dog dropped them one at a time and the shoes fell bang, bang onto the head of the, yes, you've guessed it, the pregnant wife of the judge. Oh, what a shock! She went into labour early. Fortunately, not too early. The child was born safely. But when the judge discovered the cause of his wife giving birth before her time, he flew into a fury. Abu Kasim's shoes! I might have known. Abu Kasim was dragged once more by the guard before the judge. And he said, "This is the limit, Abu Kasim. A year in prison for you, and you will be fined how much? Yes, 1,000 dinar. 1,000 dinar. Oh, Abu Kasim was in such distress. This was more money than he had saved. For the first time in his life, Abu Kasim would be in debt. That year was such a grim ordeal. But by the time he was released from his cell, Abu Kasim had come up with a plan. He took those shoes, you shoes, you are the one to the blame, directly to the palace of the Sultan of Baghdad, none other. And he begged an audience, and the Sultan seemed to have heard of Abu Kasim, some strange stories, and was curious. And Abu Kasim was given an audience, and there were the lawyer of the Sultan and his governor and stewards and people of great importance sitting around. And the Sultan said, "Abu Kasim, why have you come to me?" "These shoes," said Abu Kasim. "These shoes are the cause of all of my woes. I ask you, Sultan, ask your lawyer to draw up a contract that I might be separated legally from these shoes for all time. So whatever these shoes do, it's not my fault." "Strange request," said the Sultan. "Before I grant it, let me hear your tale." So Abu Kasim, before the judge and all of the most important ministers and people and courtiers, began to regale them with his sombre tale. And he spoke so morosely, so forlornly, with so much self-pity, that at first they tried to keep a straight face. But as the story went on, well, they couldn't stop themselves. They contained their laughter until they looked across, and there was the Sultan bellowing with laughter. And they let rip. They rolled on the floor of the palace as they listened to Abu Kasim's hilarious story. And when the story was complete, the Sultan said, Abu Kasim, you will be separated from your shoes by law, but on one condition. On the condition that you learn your lesson. Abu Kasim, it is not because of your shoes that all this has come to pass. It is because of your meanness, Abu Kasim. Every citizen of Baghdad knows the value of generosity, except for you. Be generous from now on. You will certainly regain your wealth. You are a shrewd businessman. We all know that. But share your wealth, Abu Kasim, and promise me this, that everyone who asks will be told by your own lips the story of your shoes. Well, it seems that Abu Kasim must have kept up his end of the bargain, because otherwise that story wouldn't have been passed on from generation to generation and reached the ears of Amna Burki's family, who passed it on to her and on to me, so that I today can pass it on to you, the tale of Abu Kasim's shoes. And with that, I take a moment before I tell the next story and a sip of a cup of tea as well. Being an Englishman, I can't be without my Earl Grey. Have you heard that story before?
Yes.
I'm guessing lots of you have.
I have not, and it's fair to say that it stunk.
But that story was told with such great soul.
Oh, thank you, Ralph.
Now we know who the heels are in this group, don't we?
Well, the problematic thing in that story was for me was the ending, because I don't know the ending that you've come across, but the endings that I've found when I've read it are endings which don't quite round off the story. There's this he seems to be asking for the contract, asking to be separated from his shoes, but there's no actual conclusion. But I just put some logical thinking to it, because surely how would we know the story if he hadn't passed on the story himself? So let's all hope that Abu Kasim has managed to redeem himself. So a very quick one. As I said, I love learning stories from people. Kenza Omayr. When I was here a couple of weeks ago, I told a story that I learned from a 15-year-old girl called Kenza Omayr, who lives in Italy, grown up in Italy, but her family are from Morocco. And she's doing this wonderful project of learning stories, mostly from her grandmother, who's from Casablanca in Morocco, and also from her mum and her aunt. And she's translating them all into English and into Italian. And she's got 15 years old. She's planning to write down all these stories in a book in English and Italian. Isn't that a wonderful ambition? And they're all Joha stories, or Nasruddin stories, we might call him, but in Morocco he's Joha. And the incredible thing is that the stories that she's sharing with us at the World Storytelling Cafe most weeks, at the Young International Storytellers every Tuesday, it would be 5 in UK, so about midday in Eastern time. So young people from around the world get together and share stories. And we've never heard these Nasruddin Joha stories before, these Moroccan stories. Or certainly most of us haven't. But there's a really short one that she told a couple of weeks ago that I'll just tell you. Very, very quick one, just a little pause before the next story. So Joha needed some bread. So, of course, he went to the baker. But he was dismayed to find when he arrived at the baker's, there was a queue. Such a long queue, and the sun was hot. And, oh, how long will he be standing in this queue? And Joha wondered what to do, and then he had an idea. And he called out, "Ignorant fools! All of you fools standing in this long queue, when don't you know that just along the road so-and-so is having a party? and there's food for free for everyone, and you're waiting here to buy bread when there's free food just along the road. And people turned to each other and they started talking, and before you know it, they started moving and they started running along the road, and more left the queue until there was no one left. And Joha found himself at the front of the queue, and the baker said, "Joha, what do you want?" And Joha was just about to buy a fresh loaf of bread, but he looked over his shoulder at all the people running, and he thought, Perhaps there is someone giving away free food. And before you know it, he had gone and was running after them. Well, isn't that typical? And don't we all do that sometimes? So there we are, a quick story as an interlude. But the next story I will tell is dedicated to a person. I'm not going to name her, but it's a person who is an incredibly important friend to me. And I'm telling this story in dedication to her. A friend who's been going through some challenging times, but a person of great resilience. And again, it's a story from the Middle East. Many of my stories are from that region of the world. And this story was collected by Idries Shah, who many of you are familiar with. And it's the story of Jayda. And again, it has a refrain that you can join in with if you wish. Kanya Makan Fikadim Zaman. There was once a girl called Jayda, and she had no family. She lived in a tumble-down hovel. She was poor. She was beset by ill fortune. And one day, Jayda was walking along the small road, wondering what she could find, something perhaps she could sell so she could live. And she carried her basket over her arm, and she walked along the road, and she came to a tall tree, and there was a drop of honey falling on the road in front of her. Sweet honey. And she looked up, and there were no bees, but there was a nest. If I could gather the honey from that nest, thought Jayda, I could sell the honey in the market, and so I could live. But I can't gather honey in this basket. So Jayda hurried home and found a small earthenware pot, and returned to the tree and cleverly climbed up into the branches and started filling the pot with honey. Now, the reason for Jayda's misfortune, which I haven't yet told you, is that she was pursued everywhere by a jinn, an evil spirit. And this jinn had made sure she could not succeed in her life. And the jinn saw her collecting that sweet honey. And the jinn said, "I'll soon put a stop to this." And the jinn transformed himself into a branch of the tree. And the branch of the tree swung back and forth in the wind, and suddenly knocked the jar from Jayda's hands. And that jar, that pot, fell to the ground and smashed, and the honey leaked into the dry earth. Jayda climbed down from the tree and saw there was no hope. She had lost the honey. But then as she gazed down, she saw a trail of ants appearing, and they were going towards the honey to collect it. And she said to herself, "Perhaps something good will come out of this." Could you say that? Perhaps something good will come out of this. Well, she put her basket on her arm and she continued walking along the narrow road. And suddenly she saw in the distance, coming towards her, was a rider on horseback. And the rider was riding like the wind so swiftly towards her, and was holding a great stick. And as he came closer, he swung that stick and struck a tree, and then rode on and passed Jayda, and she watched him disappear in a cloud of dust. Now Jayda went on to that tree and saw that it was a mulberry tree, and all of the dark red ripe fruit had fallen onto the ground. And Jayda thought, if I gather this sweet fruit in my basket, I can take it to the market and sell it, and so I can live. So she got down on her hands and knees, and carefully, so as not to bruise that sweet fruit, she picked up those large red-black fruit, those mulberries. Have you tasted mulberries? So good. And she filled the basket. But you know who was watching, don't you? Of course, that djinn. I'll soon put a stop to this. And the djinn transformed himself into a donkey. Hee-haw! Hee-haw! And the donkey trotted to where Jayda was filling her basket, and she reached up even to stroke that donkey's muzzle. But the donkey rolled over onto the basket, crushing that sweet fruit. So the fruit leaked onto the ground, and there was no way that Jayda could retrieve any of it. And the donkey trotted away, braying loudly. Hee-haw! Jayda got up, but then she noticed, as she looked down, a trail of ants making their way towards that crushed fruit, that pulp, and taking it away. And she said to herself, you remember? Perhaps something good will come out of this. Now it just so happened that at that moment, coming along that narrow road in the opposite direction, was the Queen of the Desert City. The Queen of the Desert City was being carried high on the shoulders of her servants, on a palanquin, sitting on a wide throne made of gold. And she had seen this unfortunate young woman, and the donkey, and the loss of that sweet fruit. And she asked her servants to set her down, and the Queen stepped over to Jayda and said, young woman, tell me your story. And Jayda began to tell the story of her life. You have a good heart, said the Queen of the Desert City. Ride with me. And she stepped onto the palanquin, sat beside the Queen on that golden throne, and was carried at shoulder height by those servants along that narrow road to the desert city. It was a fine city, or once it had been, but for so many years there had been no rain. But the people did their best, and they had their livestock, and they carried water from great distances. The Queen helped Jayda, and Jayda set up in business. Soon she had her own stall. She sold sweet perfumes, the most luxurious spices and incense, fabrics as well, the highest quality of silk. She kept her goods in a small space at the back of the little wooden house that she had built. And she was doing well because the people trusted her. She was an honest tradeswoman. But who had followed her to the desert city but that djinn? And the djinn watched her. And that night, as she stowed away her goods and went down to her bed to sleep, the djinn said, I'll soon put a stop to this. And the djinn turned himself into a little flame, carried on the wind, and set fire to that little wooden house. And the house burned brightly and soon was blazing. And Jayda, abandoning everything that she had made, she ran out of the house and watched it burn to the ground until it was no more than ash. And Jayda stood looking at where that house had been. And she walked over and she swept the ash away. And there, where the house had been, under the ash, there was a flat stone. And Jayda saw, coming from the crack around the edge of that flat stone, a trail of ants. Oh, those poor creatures have lost their home just as I have lost mine. Perhaps something good will come out of this. And Jayda, feeling sorry for those ants, reached down and using all of her strength lifted that flat stone. And as she did so, from under the ground there came rising up and gushing a fountain of clear water. And the water burst forth and ran down the channels that had been dry for so many years, and brought water to the city, and the people shouted with joy, "Jayda, you have brought the water as it was foretold." Soon the city was green. The animals and the people had enough to drink. Everything was well. The queen came to Jayda. "Oh, Jayda, it was foretold that one day a young woman who had faced great adversity, who had risen above with resilience and a positive heart, would come to the city and would bring the water with her. You are she. This is sacred water, Jayda, healing water. And this water will protect you and protect us all from evil. Jayda, you are the princess of the water of life, and you will live here for eternity. And all those who come to this city, which was once desert, all those who come with burdens and hardships in their lives, will sit beside you, and they will become well." And so, as far as I know, she lives there still, bringing healing and love, and the jinn cannot harm her, because she is Jayda, the princess of the water of life.
Wow.
Lovely, lovely, lovely.
Well, I should say that I should just round off by saying that story, I first heard it told by a wonderful storyteller called Micaela Sauber, and she's a prominent storyteller in Germany. And I heard that told at a wonderful conference where we both ran workshops, a conference called Migranet, Migration Network, and it was all about teaching children and teachers who themselves come from diverse heritages and are working in Germany and facing some challenges. So how we can, together, side by side, work together. And Micaela told that story in German, and I was listening thinking, my German's okay, but I think that's a great story. But fortunately afterwards she was able to share it with me in English so I could get it down. And it's in one of Idries Shah's lesser known books. I wonder if any of you have come across that story before, the story of Jayda. It's such a gorgeous tale, isn't it?
Yeah.
So thank you. I haven't managed to tell you any stories from here. I do tell stories from England, Devon, where I live as well. But I've been telling stories from around the world, which is what I mostly do. And if anybody wants to find out more about what I do, I'll put my website in the chat. And do email me. If you'd like to be on my email list about courses and workshops that I offer, feel free to do so.
Well, that's wonderful. What a wonderfully, I'm getting more and more delighted with Idries Shah as I run into more and more of his work. And it's strong lessons told lightly with a light touch.
Yeah, I would go along with that, Ralph, absolutely. And thank you for being, all of you, for being such delightful to share stories with, because I really enjoyed the stories in the first half, and a pleasure to reciprocate by sharing some stories. Some of my favourites.
So, Brother Blue taught us something, that we should honor the storyteller who brought us all of this gentle knowledge, how to be gently tough and and see the world from all of these different ways. And what he taught us was if we all go off mute and we put our hands together like this and then separate them with a quiet but slightly audible
That super well sums up that set of stories. Thanks so much, David.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
a great pleasure. Thank you.
Delightful, delightful, delightful.
Well, a week hence, 7 days, we are going to have as our feature the wonderful, the exciting Jane Dorfman. I'm just delighted that that she's going to be telling, and it's exciting. I've heard her, and it's great. And that will come up on the site and be sent out to our fandom. And you can get on our fandom because I just put in the URL for Tiny Letter Story Space, and you will get on our email list, and we do not spam. You'll just get notices about things we are doing and changes to what our plans are.